Okay, everyone, welcome tonight to another of our series in Ontario Cycling's Women's Month. And tonight we're joined by Rebecca Murray, who is from the Biking Lawyer, and she is going to do a presentation on Know Your Rights. So we are recording this. It will be posted on the website afterwards. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I will be moderating and stopping and answering those. We'll get Rebecca to answer those questions on the fly. But please don't hesitate, raise your hand or put a question in the chat. This is a organic conversation, even though she's presenting on the material. So, and there will be a Q&A afterwards if you want to ask further questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca and have her introduce herself and start talking about how we can understand the rules from a cycling perspective of knowing your rights on the road.
Okay, hello. I'm Rebecca Murray. I'm one of the lawyers at the Biking Lawyer. Also a longtime bike nerd in the Hamilton area. Worked at New Hope as a program coordinator and director for decades. So if any of you took the Know Your Rights workshops through there, you might recognize me. Or if your kids did Ride Smart, I also did that program and the WTQ in shop nights. And all of us basically at the firm are cyclists, like really at heart. We're cyclists and lucked into a niche area of law that allows us to like work in our passion area, right? And so, yes, we're lawyers. Obviously, I'm here as a personal injury lawyer today, but also this is a big part of us just participating in our community in a way that we find really helpful and informative, because getting into a collision is stressful. It shakes you up. It makes you feel unsure of what to do. And so we find having these little conversations about like, oh, like here's some helpful things you can do if this happens. And, you know, that a big part of that is our crash cards that many of you have through Cycling Ontario. Just as a way for us to like share our knowledge as cyclists and as lawyers who help cyclists to make sure everyone, when they're having a bad time, at least mitigates the extent of that bad time in some of these situations. So this little talk is not kind of your standard Know Your Rights talk about what to do when you're riding a bike. It's not so much about what lane position to be in or like when should you or shouldn't you Idaho stop or anything like that. It's actually more about what are your rights when you're in a crash with a motorist? What sort of post-collision supports are there? So I'm going to talk for maybe 20 minutes. We'll see how fast I get through the slides. And then the big part of this is just a Q&A. So think up some good questions and throw them in the chat and we can go over them. And I'm going to try my best not to lawyer answer everything with it depends. It will depend largely though. So we'll do our best to get through all of that. So a big thing also about this is how to help as a witness. Even if you luck out and you never have to go through this yourself, countless of our clients have been helped by having a witness who knew what to do at the scene and said, hey, I've called an ambulance, I got a photo of their license, or I know the owner of that store, I'm going to get their security footage, because it really helps to advocate for others when it's kind of hard to advocate for yourself sometimes. So all the tips today also help for if you're a witness, because as you know, the law is the law, but the reality is often a bit more messy and complicated. So we can tell everyone what to expect and these are your rights and this is how it should happen. But, you know, I think we've all experienced enough life in the last 4 years to know that's not always how things go in reality. You know, you can only plan so much. So this chat is kind of about, you know, what the law is and sometimes a little context to the reality of how things play out. You know, your rights are your rights, but they're not always a promise that it's going to come through in the end. So, you know, as it states, crashes happen. It's critical to be prepared. I know, especially for those of us like me who do more mountain biking and gravel riding, sometimes you're like, crashes are my own issue, right? Like I kind of control my crashes a little bit more. And then, it's your commutes. It's your little, I'm running out to the convenience store. Oh, I'm just going to go visit my friend, or I'm going to go to a patio and ride my bike because it's so nice. When we're not expecting, we don't have our full face helmet on. We're in a nice dress and we're just riding to, the local pub to meet a friend. And that's often when these sort of things can happen. So it's good to kind of have as much knowledge as you can kind of on your side to get through it should the worst happen. So the first step, obviously, is get safe. If you are in a collision with a vehicle and you are able to, obviously, usually get out of the road as soon as you can. Assess your injuries. I know it's hard when you're in shock, you're rattled. If you're unconscious, obviously it's not your problem at that point. So hopefully there's bystanders around. But a big thing is, check yourself out, pick yourself up, get off the road, because there are frequent occurrences where a secondary collision happens when a vulnerable road user ends up in a different lane of traffic or somewhere that, oncoming traffic really wasn't expecting them to be, right? So the big one is get safe. Something bad happened, get to the sidewalk if possible. The second one, which can feel weird to do in the moment and a little bit scary sometimes, is document. I know especially it can be really hard for women, where it feels confrontational sometimes to be like, well, I'm going to get out my phone and I'm going to take pictures, because you're shaken up, you're hurt, you don't know what to do, and now you have to like really advocate for yourself, right? But documenting everything you can when it happens is one of the most important steps for this, because you are going to be dealing with insurance companies, and insurance companies love paperwork and they love evidence and they insist on it. So, important things to document. How are you feeling? Check in with yourself first, right? But then make sure you get the driver's license plate, even if it's just taking a photo of their license plate. That's great. If you can talk to them and get their license, also great. Their insurance information. And one thing that people don't always think about is documenting damage to the car and your bike right after it happens, because after this, police will get called, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's kind of on the driver to have they gone and reported this to an accident reporting center days later. Dave, my boss, when he was hit one time, he had taken photos. He was in a bike lane and ended up breaking his elbow because someone kind of sideswiped him. He thought to take photos of the car because there's a huge rubber line down the back of this car from where his grip had rubbed on it. The driver had washed all that off before going to the collision reporting center. So then, they're in mediation, they're in discovery about this. And the driver's saying, well, we were stopped. He fell over. My car's clean. Dave had all the evidence, though, of being like, look, actually, it shows I was kind of dragged along for a block. And so, I know it feels like you're expecting the worst from people when you kind of do something like that, where you want to trust someone. Like, they just hit you. They feel bad. They're going to be honest. They also live in Ontario with the realities of our insurance premiums. They're probably a little bit worried about the bottom line with that. And they're going to go home and think, how can I minimize this for myself? And we don't want people to be like that. But foundationally, maybe it's my negative bias because I'm a lawyer and I deal with it, but they tend to do that more often than not in a lot of these situations. So, document everything you can. At the time, usually you just want to go home. You don't want to like, I'm going to get a lawyer, I'm going to get so aggressive, I'm going to start a lawsuit. You just want to go home. Like, you're hurt. It's usually like not your best day when you get into an accident or into a collision, right? So you kind of just want to go home and lick your wounds. But it is so important to kind of remember these steps and document everything you can, so that if you do choose to move forward with a claim with the insurance or with a lawsuit, you have all the information you need and you aren't kind of looking back going, shoot, I wish I'd gotten that. Step 3, this can also be concurrent with step 2, obviously. Call 911. Sorry, you might hear my dog and his disruptive evening toys in the background. But so often, you know, again, similar to the document thing, you kind of just want to go home after a collision. Like it sucks, you know, you're not feeling great, you're not feeling bold, but you do really need to call 911 and get police to the scene. When there's a collision with a vulnerable road user, police, sometimes they have bylaws that negate it, but generally across the province are expected to show up to that scene. It's not like your average collision where you can be like, this is probably under $2,000. Maybe I won't call the cops or I won't go to the collision reporting center. If it's with a vulnerable road user, the police need to be involved, you know? There's special sections of the Highway Traffic Act that protect us. The police want to help you. A big caveat to calling 911 is if you do say, I'm fine, it's okay, like I'm doing okay, they will probably take a while to show up. Generally, we say, you know what, look, you're in shock. Say, hey, I don't know how I'm feeling. I was just hit by a car. And they'll generally show up a lot quicker. And it is, you know, the more accurate response to what's going on. I've been hit by cars and been like, I'm okay. I'm just going to go home and have like a beer and a bath or something, you know, it'll be fine. And then the shock wears off and I'm like, I'm going to actually just go to the hospital because I was hit by a car. You know, even little cars are still big compared to humans. So, you know, you got to take the impact pretty seriously. I mean, also a big thing about calling 911 is it does add to statistics when it comes to road safety province-wide. If there's cyclists repeatedly getting hit at intersections, it's important that police are getting involved so that we then have these statistic reports that come out every year and say, hey, 37 cyclists got hit at this intersection. It's a problem with the intersection, you know, but if we aren't reporting these accidents or collisions, because they're not really accidents, we don't have the tools to then push forward policy change that we need to make roads safer for all of us. And if you're worried about the ambulance bill, a section we're about to talk about in a minute called the accident benefits regime does reimburse you for it. So take the fancy ride in the ambulance, you know, it will be reimbursed by insurance, or it should be. It's covered by insurance. Step 4 is seeking medical attention. I appreciate that all of these steps seem like less fun things to do after being in a collision, but they're all very important, similar to, you know, wanting to call 911 and involve the police. A lot of the times staring down a 8-hour wait in an Ontario ER right now is not the way people want to spend their time. But it is so important because, again, you were hit by a car. Like, it's a serious thing that's happened to your body. We had a couple clients who were hit by a car, and the woman was pregnant. So their first thought was just the baby. Like, is the baby okay? Are we like not even thinking of like, do both of us have broken arms right now? They were just worried about their baby. And so they pulled themselves off to the side and were just kind of trying to like sort through everything going on, asking if the other was okay. And in that time, the driver, you know, was like, well, do you want an ambulance? And they were just like, you know, in shock. So they weren't even really answering. So the driver took that as a no, you're fine, and left. And they get home and the shock wears off. And then they're like, oh my God, we got hit by a car. And like multiple broken bones involved in that. So don't underestimate the power of your own adrenaline system getting you out of this situation where you'll feel bad, but you won't feel like you've broken several bones often when you have. So get to the ER. As unfun as ERs are right now, it's a really important step to make sure, because again, if you do decide to start making insurance claims, or if you have concussion symptoms that then aren't clearing up, you have that initial diagnosis to be like, look, the accident happened in this day, you suffered these broken bones, you suffered a concussion, like these are real injuries you sustained as a result of this accident. And it really clears up the evidentiary like record of proceedings going forward, which I appreciate is like kind of boring lawyer speak, but it is really important for just making sure we have a timeline of what happened to you, right? Also, because of the shock, you might be seriously injured and not realize it. So generally, if you come into contact with something that weighs 1,000 pounds, you're going to want to go to the hospital after to make sure you're okay. Step 5, you can report the crash. Obviously it says contact us. But a big thing we do is the crash cards walk you through the steps of what evidence you need and have a QR code on them that puts you towards this Google form that actually emails all of this information back to you. So you're stressed, you're kind of just shaken up, just pull out the card, follow the steps, and then basically it's captured your little evidence bundle and it's sent it to you, so then you can worry about getting better. You can take that load off your mind and don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, did I do this? I can't remember. Did I actually get the license plate? We've got it all for you, kind of ready to go. I mean, as a boutique firm for cyclists, we think we're the best at this job, but genuinely go with who you're comfortable with. If you have a friend who's a lawyer, obviously call your lawyer friend, right? But suffice to say, we are here for you. We're here to help. We're always happy to even just have a chat after a collision and, help you sort out what's what and what went on and what can you do and what are the next steps. Because also I appreciate that this is going to be a lot of information in kind of a short amount of time. And so this is a example of our crash card. It says all of the information that you want. It's got a QR code. It sends everything to you. All of us have been in collisions where we haven't followed our own advice. I carry one of these cards myself. I work here and I still carry one of these cards because it's hard to think when you have adrenaline pumping through your body, right? So this was the best way that we could kind of simply help our community members just have a little in case of emergency card that really guides them through this process. You don't have to continue worrying about it after the fact, and you can just focus on yourself. So now I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit about what happens after. So you had your crash, had a bad day, went to the hospital, probably exacerbated your bad day, got home finally. Next day, you're probably going to feel like you were hit by a car. And now what? So there's kind of two different routes that happen kind of simultaneously, sometimes a little bit skewed. But the first one is called no fault accident benefits. Because Ontario has no fault driver's insurance, this is something that everyone is entitled to access immediately after a collision with a car, whether you're a driver, a pedestrian, a cyclist, whatever. If you were hurt by a car, you get access to no fault accident benefits. If you have your own car insurance, you actually go through your own insurer, even though you weren't the one who hit you. If you don't have insurance, you go through the driver's insurance company. And if the driver also doesn't have insurance, which seems to be an increasing phenomenon, you go through what's called the Motor Vehicle Accident Claims Fund, which is a government organization that basically exists to make sure there's at least a bottom line. So for accident benefits, the goal is rehabilitation as soon as possible. So if you have a minor injury, like just some bumps and scrapes and, maybe a sprain or a strain, you get access to $3,500 worth of rehab benefits immediately. If you end up with even a little, like a pinky fracture or a concussion, or obviously more serious broken bones, you get entitled to $65,000 worth of rehabilitation benefits. So that's things like if you need a PSW for a couple weeks because you're really hurt, it just helps them fund that person coming into your house right away. If you need to go to physio, which you're probably going to need to go to physio after this, it funds that physio. If you need dental work because, sometimes your face gets involved in the collision, that's also covered. And then there's a third tier, which is called catastrophic impairment. It sounds as serious as it is. That's access to $1 million over your lifetime. If you are catastrophically impaired from a collision, generally it will be a loved one helping you with the application at that point, because catastrophic is like the full meaning of that definition. It's not great. But so because we have this side, there's then the other side. Oh, sorry, you do have to apply within 30 days. You just kind of fill out forms. Usually you contact your insurance company and they email you the forms right away. Don't let the forms languish in your inbox. I love doing that with forms in my personal inbox. Do not do it with these forms. They do need to be submitted within 30 days, or your insurance company then has grounds to start being like, well, the paperwork wasn't perfect. So, and that's when you get into that messy bike picture of the reality of these situations. You can also get some lost wages. If you're off work for more than a week, they'll top you up a little bit. And then you get to the other side, which is the tort, or what we more commonly refer to as the lawsuit side of things. So because Ontario has the accident benefits regime, which is about getting you better, get you back on your bike as soon as possible. There is actually a pretty high bar to be met to be able to sue a driver in Ontario. And that's that you have to suffer a permanent and serious impairment. If you are not permanently and seriously impaired, it doesn't matter if the person was drunk, you cannot sue them if they've hurt you with a car. It's a problem. Insurance lobby groups work hard to do what they do. So it's why the accident benefit stuff is really important to get on right out of the gate, because that's likely your primary access to physio. It's not so much cash in your pockets, but it's the treatment you need that you maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to afford yourself, right? But if you do suffer a permanent serious impairment, you can sue the driver for things like your pain and suffering. Pain and suffering in Canada, not like in America. Sometimes our lawsuits have really big fancy numbers for pain and suffering, but pain and suffering is generally actually fairly modestly compensated in Canada, because the reality is you can't monetarily compensate someone for a loss of enjoyment of life. It's just something that's happened. You can get compensated for past, present, future income loss. This is a big one. If it's like, oh, you were supposed to get a huge promotion in 2 weeks and you got into this crash and you haven't been able to get back to work and someone else got that promotion, we can also help with like healthcare costs, where it's like accident benefits will cover $65,000. But if any of us has been to a sports therapist or physio in the last couple of years, I'm sure we're all aware of how fast you could actually burn through 65 grand doing physio alone, right? And so if someone does have more significant healthcare costs, but they're not catastrophically impaired, that's where kind of a lawsuit can help make up that middle ground of like, they're going to need lifelong physio, just to keep pain management or keep functionality, which is a valid goal of physio, right? And then Part of the tort covers property damage, and some other kind of associated expenses. Accident benefits is something that people frequently kind of do on their own. The lawsuit side, I would get a lawyer involved for sure. Our firm happily represents people on accident benefits and helps them through that too, because it is a very bureaucratic system, which you don't need a law degree for, but sometimes it feels like you do just to know how to even find the proper form some days. But like I said, our firm is always happy to even have a chat. Like if you have questions about how this works, or you're not sure what you should be doing, or your insurers suddenly changing their mind, we're always happy to help and just consult for free with people who are going through this, because it's a difficult time and paperwork does not make it better. A big part of this is also that there's going to be different ways that we're treated. And based on what kind of bodies we're existing in and what kind of body like the driver's in, right? Like I maybe have tall girl energy, but I'm not. So, if it's like a giant dude coming out of the car after I've been hit, I don't know how brave I'd be feeling after that. And it can be really hard to navigate that system, then also feeling like you're not on your strongest footing all the time. So sometimes it can be hard to report things to the police. If you, as many women have experienced domestic violence issues and have had to rely on the police and have been let down, it may be hard to trust that they're actually going to help you again in the future. Navigating the healthcare system as a woman is also, like, statistically notoriously difficult. Women's pain is not seen the same. Women take longer to be diagnosed on average. And it can be really hard. So one of the things we recommend is call a friend, have a buddy there at hospitals. You can also ask for a patient advocate. It's their job to help you and to make sure you are getting the full treatment you need, because again, especially if you're all shaken up from this collision, it can be really hard to think clearly and be like, wait, no, I do need to push for this, when really you're tired, you're hurt, you just want to go home. And so calling a buddy, calling a spouse, absolutely do it. I have friends who come with me to certain doctor's appointments sometimes, where I'm like, I just can't. Like sometimes you just can't do it, and you're like, I need a friend to at the very least be like, no, you're not crazy, that was a little bit offside. Like it's important, it's important that we stick together, basically. There's also honestly fair distrust of lawyers in the legal system, especially like personal injury lawyers are kind of like famous in pop culture for not being the most reputable folks at all times. So if you need a friend with you when you're going to consult with a lawyer, absolutely do that. If you're not sure, call the law society, check up on things. Also, it can be hard when you have different responsibilities and employment situations, right? Like if you've got 4 kids at home, your motivation to like really be pushing for physio and really be pushing for additional supports is probably going to be, lessened a little bit. It's easy to put yourself on the back burner if you're actually used to doing that. But I'm here to be bossy and say, don't do that. Like put yourself first in this situation. You deserve to get better. You deserve to get whatever compensation you need, and you deserve the help you need in this situation.
Yeah, that's great. Rebecca, we have one kind of a question, but like there's some preliminary pieces in front.
Yeah.
So the individual said, I was cycling home when a car drove through a red light and an intersection and hit me. The car did not stop. Multiple bystanders were witnesses and helped me and tried to get the license plate, but couldn't. The police were called and I was taken to the hospital. I followed up multiple times with the police, but they told me they had no further information. There were multiple establishments at the intersection and along the major street with cameras. After a few weeks, I made a final phone call to the police to ask, and they told me any camera footage would have been taped over by then. No driver was not bound to be held accountable for my injuries. I didn't feel that the police were very helpful in this situation. If I had been well enough, I would have gone to the source, the video footage myself, but this was not possible. So my question is, what could I have done differently in this situation to actually get some action to find and hold the driver of the hit and run accountable? Should I have gotten a lawyer?
Yeah, so first let me say I'm sorry that happened. That's
It's
it's
horrible.
kind of an unfortunate story in Ontario, and it's really like it's kind of extra hard because like someone got to do something so horrific with no consequences, and you actually ended up having to take all of the consequences of this other person's poor and reckless decisions, and that's not fair. Um, Police can be very difficult. One of the reasons I do generally suggest you talk to a lawyer, especially in a hit and run, is because then it becomes our problem. You know, I'm very happy sliding into some detective's inbox every single morning if I have to make sure they know this is an issue that is important and I expect something to be dealt with. And a big thing that lawyers can also help with is navigating the motor vehicle accident claims fund, which also pays out if you were hit by a hit and run. If there is no driver to name, you sue the fund because you were still hurt by a motor vehicle in Ontario. And this is part of a pool that all of the insurers pay into to ensure that even if someone doesn't have insurance, even if it's a hit and run, you can get some help. You have access to accident benefits through the MVAC, and then there also is like a very lessened payout amount, but you can still sue under the civil lawsuit that I had also been talking about. That one's limited to $200,000, which seems criminal in this economy, but it's better than nothing. But unfortunately, justice in terms of drivers facing consequences for their actions, it very rarely happens, even if you have the driver's information. We have, unfortunately, constant stories of drivers hitting people and then there just being delays at traffic court. So the case just gets dismissed entirely. Or they're allowed to plead out for like an improper signaling when they almost killed someone, and it doesn't ever really feel like it's adequate or appropriate. But generally I would recommend talking to a lawyer, because at the very least you have someone like me on the other side of the line who can commiserate with you and say, yes, your feelings are valid and what's happening isn't fair. And sometimes that can be helpful.
I agree,
Yeah.
right? And I think even just in terms of calling to get that advice and direction in terms of what should I do next and how should I do this. So having somebody
Yeah.
in your corner is so important. We
Yeah.
have another question.
Yeah.
In the event we are involved in a hit and run accident, how do we get the ambulance fee covered? In Simcoe County, it is $500 a trip. And how do we get insurance coverage for medical if we do not have car insurance?
Yeah, so again, for the hit and run, it would end up going through the motor vehicle accident claims fund that's run by the province. So you still have your normal accident benefits form. It's just the government paying out. You would still have them covering all of the standard things that insurers are expected to cover in this situation, which includes the ambulance ride. Because it's an expensive ride. Sometimes I feel like it would be cheaper if they took you in a limo to the hospital, but here we are, you know. So definitely it's through the motor vehicle accident claims fund. I mean, it is the government, which also means it's very paperwork heavy and can be even more bureaucratic at times. So, like I said, definitely speak to a lawyer. Personal injury lawyers tend to work on what's called a contingency fee agreement, which means we don't charge you for our hourlies. You know, we take a piece of the pie at the end. If you lose, we lose, and it's fine. We're happy to have helped you with what we could have. I mean, I like to think our firm doesn't lose because we're cyclists. We care. This is what we know. This is what we do. This is what we love, right? Like you're our community members. We fight like hard for you. But even if you don't choose us, like any lawyer generally has free consultation time and is very happy to guide you through at least the basics of what you need to be doing to start getting some things covered and some help.
And we do have as members, there is sport accident insurance. If you're doing a sanctioned activity and this happens, that's up to 50,000. And then if you buy the anytime on a bike insurance, that covers you for any time on your bike. So those pieces as members, having access to that insurance, you do have as an Ontario cycling member. Okay.
So, I mean, I think I'm actually almost done with my slides here. Just to point out, we do have a website that's very resource intensive for cyclists. Our saying is we've got a blog about that because we have a blog about it. I'm working on this like behemoth about navigating the nitty gritty of accident benefits because I'm just nerdy about that part of it. So I've done a very detailed kind of work through. We also have just like posters and stuff that can be put up places, but also just that give you kind of a quick rundown of what you need, like helmet, lights, and a bell. Yeah, and that's us. These are our socials. If you have any questions or anything, I'm sure my email will be attached to this, but also you can just email info@thebikinglawyer.ca at any time and someone will respond eventually. I mean, full disclosure, we are a law office, so we can be brutal with email some days, but we do our best.
Yeah, and I'll be and we're getting a couple of comments coming in, which will be good. So, but I will be sending out an email to everyone with some of the resources, and I do have a link to the motor vehicles accident fund, which will be included in the email, so everybody has that direct access as well. The first comment I have is, what does the Ontario cycling insurance cover that my own auto insurance does? Well, we are general liability insurance of up to 10 million, and it's not aggregate, it's per occurrence, as well as your sport accident. So if you're a full member through us, through either your challenge or your compete, you would get $50,000 in sport accident coverage, which is a top up of your own healthcare benefits as well as OHIP. And then you'd also have a general liability insurance of up to $10 million. So that's what our coverage does. We don't cover car pieces, but we do cover personal liability and sport accident while on your bike during sanctioned activities. And if you want to do any time on the bike, that's an additional insurance policy that we do offer. The second question we have is, I had gotten into a minor collision with a car, a right hook. I did the first couple steps and called the cops. They asked if I needed the ambulance, which I didn't, and they recommended reporting the crash at a division since they couldn't do it online or over the phone. They didn't come to the scene because the driver stayed and I was fine. I knew something was up with my ankle and later realized I sprained it when I got it checked up. What's the timeline of when to report it to the collision center? Because I highly doubt the driver did, and I ended up forgetting to do so and thought too much time had passed. The driver has provided me with compensation, and I was able to get my bike and myself sorted for the most part. That was actually a good driver.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're cyclists and they're like, ooh, and like actually work pretty hard to make things as right as they can. Generally, I believe you're supposed to report it within 7 days. Often you do have to go in person to a collision reporting center. I think you can fill out in Toronto part of the form online, but you do have to finish up with an in-person component. Generally, I mean, I'm not sure if there's a hard limit on when it's actually too far gone to just report that something happened. But yeah, we generally say like as soon as possible and within the week and definitely within the month. Like it really needs to get done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And somebody's following up again on the anytime on the bike insurance. If we have already signed up as a member, can we still add that? Yes, you can. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@ontariocycling.org. It's done through CCN, so it is a way you can add that in after the fact. A follow-up on the last accident question was, why do they not offer online reporting for minor incidents to have better stats?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't don't even have an it depends answer for that one. I don't know. You know, we're constantly pushing for better metric analysis, better access to data. Like, you know, we're lawyers, we're kind of information nerds about that sort of thing, but also we do a lot of advocacy and policy work. So the statistics end up being so important. I mean, I think unfortunately it boils down to the fact that it's just not an issue that's taken seriously enough, I think, maybe by our society at large, that it's not, you know, why should they make it easier for us when we've gone through something like getting hit by a car? Which it's unfortunate, and I don't know, I mean, I personally wish there was easier, more effective reporting and more public access to the statistics that actually come from it. But I would say, you know, write to your local MP about it and, you know, be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease in the world.
We need lots of squeaky wheels in situations like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there any other questions that anyone has? Oh, continuation from the same one. They said, I work at a post-secondary institution and I've heard many international students who get into crashes or assaults while they're on their bikes, but are too afraid to go to the police. They have a lack of support in the country and are too afraid to get involved with the police. I've heard that too. Do you have any advice to support these students?
I mean, I think just doing your best to be a safe person that they can talk to, and, you know, helping to guide them through the situation, because it is something that we also come across frequently, especially where, like, if someone's on like refugee status, they're terrified to involve the police or worried about what this will this impact their residency application. So often, at the very least, if they're afraid to go to the police, get them in contact with a lawyer. Like, if I have a client who's too afraid to go to the police, I'll go with them. Like, it's my job, or our job as lawyers, to be your advocate for you 100%. You know, we're the dog in front barking for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. So we're always happy to help, especially understanding that access to justice is a very, you know, complicated topic and potentially not actually accessible to everyone in our society, depending on like who they are in our society, what color their skin is, what gender they are. And there's different barriers that, you know, people are gonna face. And so just do your best to, you know, be a safe person and like be like, hey, like, would you be interested if I went with you to a lawyer or something like that, and like maybe help them make the calls to build up that confidence and support them through that process.
Yeah, that's really important. Another comment or question. My daughter was hit by a car and called the police. A police car came by while they were waiting, but the police said they would have to wait for another police car since they were off to another call. This should never happen. How do we stop this?
Yeah, I mean, we've all been seeing the headlines these days about policing in Ontario and the state of it. It's a tough situation. They're the people we expect the most to be there for us and to help us. And more, it kind of seems like they're a bit too stretched thin to maybe do that the way they need to all the time. And it puts, you know, the citizens in unsafe situations. I would potentially make a claim to the police oversight body. I would make a complaint to the police about it. There is a thing called the Ontario Independent Police Review Board. I think that might be the acronym. They change it every couple of years, and they're changing it again in April to become the Police Accountability Task Force or something. I haven't learned the new acronym for it. But there are like ombudsmen, and again, get a lawyer. We love fighting with cops. So, you know, it's something we spend a lot of time doing as lawyers, no matter what area we're practicing in. So at the very least, we'd usually know what email to point you towards, to be like, hey, actually that wasn't okay and you need to apologize for it. Also, again, write to your local MPs, write to your city councilors, because the more times it's brought up, the more people realize it's a problem. Like reporting it not only to police, but to city councilors, city planners, members of parliament, help it become an issue that's on their radar also, right? Because I think we all think, well, someone else will tell them when it happens to them. And then none of us speak up and no one realizes it's a problem until we all start talking, right? So tell everyone you can, basically. But I do not have a good answer for how to solve the policing issue that's going on in the province.
They followed up with the police never did show up for her.
Yeah, all I can say is I'm sorry that happened. It shouldn't happen. That's not how it's supposed to work. And unfortunately, that's where we get into the difference between the law and the realities of participating as part of the law in society. But so, you know, again, complain basically is the answer to it. Is you got to complain about it when it happens.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, another comment. It's just a comment only. What if police are unsupportive on scene? So, for example, they were part of a ride. A black truck was being aggressive and screaming at the cyclists. This individual called 911. The OPP came to the rest stop and they went to speak to him. He noted that we cyclists shouldn't be cycling 2x2, so double echelon, and dismissed me. I was beyond insulted. I walked away feeling the patriarchy and lack of care for cyclists, and I had even reported the license plate on the 911 call.
Yeah, I feel you. This is like, it's an unfortunate amount of our job is following up with the police about asking why they haven't done their job. Reporting to the police is the correct thing to do. It is an important step of the process, but it is increasingly, unfortunately, something that leads to really unsatisfying results and can sometimes also like exacerbate traumas that we've experienced, where you go for help and the person who's supposed to help you functionally rejects your request for assistance. And so again, this is when we say, do you have a friend who's really good at writing strongly worded emails, or like a lawyer who can kind of help take the sting out a little bit by saying, oh, I'm like, this is my job. I write these emails. I'm used to this treatment. So it's a bit easier for me to then like be like, well, I'm going to write that email. I'm going to get a frustrating response, but it's also a response I'm usually expecting. So it can sting a little bit. And then we can have a conversation about that in a way that's a lot less harsh and traumatizing than you having to bear the brunt of that response head on yourself.
Yes, I agree. Next question. Same individual said you brought up side-by-side biking. How much of the road does the cyclist legally have? We actually had our ride leader training last night, and this was one of the questions. So it's municipally different. It's not a regulation across all of Ontario. So there's parts in Waterloo, for instance, where you can get arrested ticketed if you ride in a double echelon, and then there's other areas where you can. So it's based on my understanding, it changes. So you really have to know what the rules are in your area or where you're going. So if you decide to hop on the GO train with your bike, know where you're going and what the rules are.
Yeah, it's very much an it depends thing. My answer to it is always do what makes you feel safe first and foremost. Like, I'm from Hamilton, so we have the benefit / kind of double-edged sword of very narrow streets, which means municipally we are expected to take the lane as cyclists. Right. We aren't expected to be allowing cars to pass us at all because you can't safely. Yeah. And so it's good in that you don't get in trouble for it. It's bad in that cars tend to not love that behavior so much. But, you know, that's another topic for another day of people's feelings in their cars. But riding 2x2 very much does depend on the municipality. And also, like, it seems like the mood of the cop on the day that they're they come across the situation and whether they want to deal with the issue or whether they want to blame the cyclists. We are vulnerable and marginalized road users. And I think sometimes a lot of us tend to hold positions of a bit more power and respect in society. And so you're not necessarily used to that treatment. And it can be quite a shock when you're suddenly being treated like secondary or othered. But it is something to unfortunately kind of expect when dealing with these systems, because the road use and road use sharing is a system of power in our societies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I love having garbage thrown at my head. That's always wonderful.
Yeah. I love getting coal rolled on me. It feels great in my lungs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, those were all really great sharing. So I really appreciate people putting those comments and sharing. And I feel very badly for everybody who has experienced these situations. It's not fun, and I feel for you. It's horrible. If Does anyone have any last questions before we wrap up here for tonight? As I said, this is a recording and we will be posting the recording on our website. I will be sending up a follow-up email with some links to some resources for everyone as well. And as well as with Rebecca's email. So if anyone has some further questions they wish to reach out to her with, they can. But if there's anything anyone else would like to share or ask a question about, please feel free to do so now. If not, within the next minute here, we'll be finishing for the evening, and we've got to thank you for a very informative workshop. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate everyone taking the time tonight to join us and share, and thank you so much, Rebecca. This was great. Lots of good information and lots of good advice for women in terms of like how to understand how you're going to be approaching situations. I especially loved your reinforcing of documentation and taking the time to take those pictures and recording as much as possible. I think that's really important. We all tend to forget to do that. So
yeah,
I think that's a really good one. So thank you so much, everyone. So much appreciation. Again, if anyone has anything else, please feel free to either email myself or to email Rebecca. Okay, I had a question. The individual who just talked about non-club sanctioned ride, like let's go for a ride on an online group that's not affiliated with a club. Please email us at info@ontariocycling.org. That's actually a sanctioned versus unsanctioned insurance topic, and not necessarily know your rights in a bike accident topic. So please email us at the office and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you, and kind of dig down on those sanctioned versus unsanctioned and what the insurance looks like in those situations, because that's more specific to our membership. But I want to thank all of you so much for joining us tonight. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And I hope you all stay safe out there, please. And remember that you're not alone and that there are people who you can turn to with your questions and your concerns. So thank you so much, everyone. And hope you have a great night. Thank you.
thank you.